You're watching The Legal Breakdown. So there's reporting now from the New York Times that the Secret Service has begun discussions about what happens if Donald Trump is jailed for contempt during his criminal trial in Manhattan. So we're going to talk about that, but first, just a reminder for those watching that Glenn and I will be doing comprehensive coverage of the entirety of this trial. So if you want to follow along every single day, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. Okay, so Glenn, according to reporting, what came of these discussions from the Secret Service around this prospect of Donald Trump actually being jailed?
Yeah, it's about time that they're getting around to talking about how are they going to handle Donald Trump's security, not if, but when he lands himself in a jail cell, because it really does feel like that day is coming in a couple of different ways, both on the criminal contempt front and then in the event of conviction on the sentencing front. So there's new reporting in the New York Times that federal officials, state officials in New York, and city officials are all talking about putting plans in place for how to handle Donald Trump's confinement. I think the most immediate issue is we are waiting for Judge Merchan to issue his ruling on 10 counts of criminal contempt. Each count of criminal contempt carries up to a $1,000 fine, but it also carries up to 30 days in jail. So now all of the stakeholders, so to speak, in dealing with not only protecting Donald Trump, but incarcerating Donald Trump as they would incarcerate any defendant who was ordered into confinement, whether for contempt or after being sentenced. And they're going to have to deal with this. Now, we have talked about this a lot. I've talked about it with some of my colleagues who are former federal prosecutors and former Bureau of Prisons, BOP, employees and officials. And I have always maintained, Brian, that it's not that hard to confine a high-profile inmate safely and securely. I was involved in that all the time. Of course, the high-profile inmates that needed to be protected were, for example, a hitman for a criminal organization that we prosecuted as part of a RICO case in D.C. And here's what I will say. The Federal Bureau of Prisons, first of all, and we can put a pin in the fact that this is a New York State case, not a federal case, but let me circle back to that in a minute because we have a way to deal with the fact that there are different jurisdictions involved here. But the Federal Bureau of Prisons is really adept at protecting inmates who need to be protected. And I think that can include anybody up to, and including high government officials. What they actually have, and I don't know how well known this is, I don't think I'm divulging any federal secrets, is there are Federal Bureau of Prison facilities that have satellite facilities that are right next door, almost adjacent to or connected to the BOP facility proper, where they can house protected inmates and only protected inmates. So also in the New York Times reporting, they mentioned that, there are a number of New York State confinement facilities that have been shut down over time in whole or in part. They could easily, open a wing or reopen a wing of any number of those confinement facilities, and it would be entirely safe. Why? Because it would have a population of one inmate, Donald Trump. Nobody's going to be looking to shank the former president or steal his lunch tray, right? So it can be done. I actually think it can be done fairly easily. The challenge is the Secret Service by law is required to protect the president. So that, I think, would carry right into a confinement facility if that's where the president found himself. Now, there are a couple of potential fixes for that. Actually, I think there are three ways to deal with it. One, you can sentence the Secret Service to go in there and provide round-the-clock protection, sit outside Donald Trump's cell, taste his food, and do all that. Or there's legislation that has been introduced, I believe, in the House of Representatives that would say, listen, if you're a government official, up to and including president, and you're convicted of felonies and you are ordered into confinement, incarceration, you lose your Secret Service protection. I think that makes some sense. Who knows if that will become law. And then the third thing that could be done is agencies could enter into a memorandum of understanding. So, for example, the Secret Service, without violating the federal law that requires them to protect the president, might be able to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Bureau of Prisons and the U.S. Marshals Service, U.S. Marshal Service also provides lots of protective services for inmates who are in, for example, witness protection programs, including in prison facilities. And, they could enter into an agreement that took all of this into account. That one thing I wanted to circle back to. I prosecuted as a federal prosecutor, and sometimes what we would do is the feds would enter into memorandums of understanding with state and local confinement facilities. So, for example, if I had a protected inmate that was going to testify in a big trial, but he was confined, I would want to move him out of, for example, the D.C. jail, because there might be lots of folks there who would, want to do him harm. We would contract with a local confinement facility or a state confinement facility in Maryland or in Virginia, and we would cubbyhole the protected inmate down there. So there can be arrangements made between state and federal confinement facilities to, put an inmate where the inmate, will be safe, whether it's a federal inmate going into a state facility or a state inmate going into a federal facility. So that's a mouthful, but there are a lot of potential fixes for this challenge of how do we safely incarcerate a former president.
So that's focusing mostly on process, but let's talk about the likelihood of it actually happening. It does seem like Donald Trump is trying to get jailed. Alina Habba has gone on TV likening the prospect of Trump being jailed to Nelson Mandela. Donald Trump took the Truth Social and he said the same thing. So he's kind of glorifying this idea. Even before the judge ruled on his show cause hearing, Trump was already out there attacking the judge on Truth Social. So again, it seems like he's not doing himself any favors in terms of trying to stay out of a cell. Is there a world in which Trump could derive some benefit from being jailed?
Legal benefit, no. Political benefit, sure, because it seems like, he can say or do anything and his base is inspired to send the few hard-earned dollars many of them have. So I agree with you. I think it may be that Donald Trump will continue to push Judge Merchan by violating the gag order a little bit farther and a little bit farther. And Judge Merchan's opening salvo may be, you're in criminal contempt again. I'm ordering you to serve 10 days in jail, and then Donald Trump will explode online, albeit once he gets out of his 10 days of confinement, because he won't have his phone to post things, and he'll say, you see what they're doing to me? Send me your money. So he may want to find himself on the inside of a jail cell, at least for, some minimal period of time, and then he'll come out, he'll probably make the calculation, how bad was it versus how much money did I raise?
Yep.
I raised a lot of money. Let me commit another, contempt of court, so I go back for another couple of weeks. That is Donald Trump's calculation.
Now, Trump's campaign is suggesting that the prospect of him being jailed for violating his gag order 10 times, again, mind you, shows contempt for American democracy. That's what they're saying. What's your response to that?
I think it shows respect for the rule of law. I mean, I don't know how we've come to a place where anybody can violate court orders with impunity and expect not to be punished. Of course, we are also at a place where just a couple of days from now, the Supreme Court will decide whether a president of the United States can commit all the crimes he wants against the American people with impunity and immunity from prosecution. So, how we have let Donald Trump drag our nation, our democracy down to this low point is beyond me, other than the Republican Party seems to be all in, and they seem to love Donald Trump more than they love democracy.
Perfectly put. We'll leave it there. And of course, for everybody watching right now, if you want to follow along with Glenn and I's coverage of the entirety of this trial as it continues to progress, including the prospect of him possibly being thrown into jail as the result of violating these gag orders, please make sure to subscribe. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Teller Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.